In this world, there is both a hero and a demon king. A hero is one who fights in the name of the empire. As for the demon king, he is the true ruler of the demonic realm. Having encountered the hero in battle, the demon king said that it seemed this time he was acting as the aggressor. The hero only waved his sword with a cry and did not answer. The hero receives his powers from the world and uses them for one single purpose: to kill the demon king. On the other hand, the demon king exists only to kill the hero. The demon king waved his hand, striking purple lightning on the ground between them. One person from the hero's party said that he was already behind him. A demon from the king's army ran up to the man and told the others to stop. Then, a girl with a magic wand named Rini quickly arrived on the battlefield, kicking the man. She shouted that they would deal with these weaklings. People from the hero squad became very nervous when they saw her. After all, she was one of the squad leaders loyal to the demon king. There are a total of 12 official squads, numbered 1 to 12. They are the cruel and powerful subordinates of the demon king. All the detachment commanders gathered together, and attacking the people at once shouted that they would destroy them all. One of the commanders, named Aeld, swung his sword, delivering a powerful blow. After him, Rayleigh used her magic and summoned a magic circle, after which she laughed loudly, firing rays of light at her opponents. They say that no one can resist them, but even such demons find it difficult to deal with a hero. The hero thrust his sword into the ground, and golden sparks began to emanate from it. After this, a shockwave passed. The demons covered their faces from the rising wind and dust. They were surprised by the hero's strength. However, there is someone who has already killed the hero once. The commander of the Zero Squad, Dion Hart, known in the demonic kingdom as the Demon Hart. The moment the hero used his power, Dion appeared on the battlefield, and a second later he was already dead. His essence as the Joker of the Demon King is already well known. He is, among other things, the talent most valued by the king. When Dion threw his resignation letter on the king's table, the king looked at it, puzzled. After reading it, he said that he would like to quit. The Demon King remained silent, pondering his words. Then he hit the table with his pen, breaking it, and exclaimed, "What did he just say?" Out of rage, he hit the table with his palms, causing it to crack, and all the papers scattered around the office. One of these documents flew into Dion's face, but he did not react to it. The veins on the king's face bulged with anger, and he asked how Dion dared try to leave him. After that, he ran out from behind the table and fell at the feet of his subordinate, hugging him and saying that he would never let him go. He looked up at him with a worried look and exclaimed, "You don't want this, right? Why are you suddenly doing this?" Dion looked away indifferently and remained silent. The Demon King stood up and asked, "Is there something you don't like about the castle? Do subordinates not show you due respect? Are they discriminating against you because you are human?" His subordinate remained silent again, and he frowned, thinking that this was impossible. The Demon Hart is one whose power cannot be rivaled. Despite being human, he has stunning power that cannot be obtained even through hard training. He is an object of universal veneration and respect. The strongest card is in his hands, but who has the courage to stop him? Dion finally replied that this was not the case. His subordinates were not to blame for anything. The king calmed down a little and asked, "Then, what is the reason?" He peered into his subordinate's imperturbable face and thought that he could not understand from his expression what he was thinking about now. He said, "If you don't tell me, then—" But his subordinate interrupted him and asked, "Would you kill me?" The Demon King wanted to say something about his subordinates, but as soon as he heard those words, he exclaimed, "What did you say?" He grabbed Dion by the shoulders and replied that he would never do that. He just wanted to know the reason. "Why do you say that, when you know how much I appreciate you?" He started shaking him and asking, "Is it because I didn't send you to the border recently? Is it because your body is eager to fight? You understand that I can't do anything about it, right?" Dion replied that this was not the case, but the king began to worry about him again. He asked him to wait, raised his voice, and told him to calm down. After this, the king fell silent. He frowned when he saw blood flowing from his subordinate's nose. He was shaken and said that he was bleeding again. Dion put his hand to his nose and apologized for dirtying the floor. The Demon King became very worried about his condition and shouted to the whole castle that a doctor was needed. "Bring the doctor of the commander of the Zero Detachment." What does he even do when his commander is in this state? Soon Dion was seated on the sofa and Dr. Ben began to examine him. The king walked from side to side, very worried about him. Ben raised his hand to Dion's palm and used magic, after which the king sat down on the sofa opposite and asked how he was. Ben replied that, as he could have guessed, these were the consequences of the battle, the wound Dion had received during the fight against the hero. The Demon King did not let him finish and said in a threatening tone that he did not call him here to listen to information he already knew. He demanded that Ben find ways to cure him as soon as possible. If he failed, he himself knew what awaited him, right? Ben got nervous and, after a short pause, replied that he knew and would do his best. After this, the king invited Dion to continue their conversation later, telling him to come back once he was better. He called out to those standing outside the door and told them to take the commander of Squad Zero to his room. Several demons in white coats entered the room and began to carry out the order. Ben grabbed Dion by the hand and led him to the exit, but Dion asked him to wait and said that he was fine, he could walk there himself. Ben did not agree and replied that he would rather take him. After that, Dion was placed on a medical gurney and taken to his room. As they drove him along the corridor, the demons that crowded there began to ask, did the commander of the Zero Squad start bleeding again? One demon replied that he had thrown himself on the hero's body when the hero decided to self-destruct. Frankly, it was surprising that he escaped with minor injuries. Rumor has it that even in his relaxed state, he is still the second most powerful, right behind the Demon King. Another demon said that he was the talent closest in strength to the king, and he truly respected him, even though he was human. Another demon agreed and said that it was such a great happiness that he was with them, as expected from the commander of Squad Zero. Listening to their conversations, Deon Hart thought that he had screwed up. He just wanted to leave and start a happy life, drinking tea every day, sleeping and having fun. But they continued to say whatever they wanted. Soon they reached the door of his room and a demon told everyone to hurry up. Hien was already there. They went inside and Dion thought, did he kill the hero? Is he strong? The demons laid him on the bed, and a girl asked if he was hurting anywhere. His pulse returned to normal. Another demon told the others to give him wet towels. He had a fever. They put a cool towel on his forehead, and Dion thought it was all nonsense. After the demons finished all the procedures, they decided to leave him alone. Bowing their heads, they said goodbye and told him to rest. Lying on the bed, Dion thought, is he the demon Mirit? No, he's Dion Hart. He nervously clutched the blanket in his hands and thought that, in the castle of the Demon King, he was not who they thought he was the weakest person. Soon the maid brought him water and said that she would take the glass with her as soon as he finished drinking. He drank the water and handed her the glass, thanking her, but when he put the glass back on the tray, he accidentally touched her hand and she twitched, causing the glass to begin to fall. She caught it quickly and excitedly apologized to him, but he remained silent. After a short pause, he asked her to leave. She obeyed and went to the door, smiling, as she thought that their hands had touched. He waited until she left and sighed heavily, saying that it seemed like she hated him. It even hurt him that she didn't want her hands to touch his. In comparison, the Demon King was very worried about him. He remembered how, during another illness, he had left his room and the Demon King had found him. He had exclaimed, "Why are you wandering around the corridors when you have not yet fully recovered?" He told his subordinates to look after him. When he ate, the king noticed his small portion and asked how he would restore his strength if he only ate that much. After those words, he threw a huge chicken on the table. Dion said that it was too much. Every time the king saw him not in bed, he worried and did not let him be. Dion lay down on the bed and thought that the demons in this kingdom must take everything to extremes. He was the only person in this demon realm born with the weakest body, one that suffers from the slightest stress. He was mistakenly mistaken for a strong man and was therefore appointed commander of the Zero Squad, making him a direct subordinate of the Demon King. For now, he could lie about the consequences of the battle with the hero, but if someone found out that he was born with a weak body, a picture of the Demon King cutting off his head popped into his mind. He immediately jumped out of bed, screaming loudly. He grabbed his neck with his hand and, sweating with fear, thought that he would die. He could no longer stay here. He imagined how the commanders of other troops, along with the king, would laugh at him, mistaking him for a toy, and he began to bite his nails, thinking that he must leave this place in the most peaceful way possible, no matter the cost. He was going to live a long and carefree life. The only way to achieve this was to leave the demonic realm. Suddenly, the chandelier in his room swayed. His deputy Ed loudly opened the doors to his room and called out to him in concern. Dion called back in surprise and asked if he had just returned from the human world. Dion lay in his bed and confirmed Ed's words, after which Ed took out a cube and said with a smile that he had brought him a new thing known as a mirror cube. Looking at his radiant smile, Dion thought that Ed was one of the demons around whom he could feel calm. He visited the human world and brought back trinkets with which Dion could relieve his boredom. Ed handed him the cube and said that he could have fun with it, but suddenly he stopped short and exclaimed that that was not what he wanted to say. Did he faint? Ed asked. Dion looked at the cube and replied that everything was fine now. Ed asked, "What's fine? What can we do to spare you the consequences of that battle?" He closed his eyes and clenched his fist, beginning to curse the hero. Dion, answering him only in his thoughts, admitted that they should probably let him be reborn, but instead he replied aloud that he had brought the trouble upon himself. Ed exclaimed loudly, "That's not right. Wasn't it you who stopped the hero for the sake of all of us?" Dion thought to himself that this was not true. Ed's face darkened with rage, and he rubbed his chin thoughtfully, saying that he would find a way to cure him, even if it meant beating Ben. Dion thought, what kind of nonsense is he talking about? Demons are truly frightening creatures. After that, Ed wished him a good rest and left. Dion saw him off with a smile. When Ed was gone, Dion thought that no demon was more worried about him than Ed was. He could only thank him for that. The Demon King also cared about him, although sometimes he went too far. Still, Dion had been able to survive here thanks to the king. But even so, it was still too much. He hoped nothing else would cause any more misunderstandings. Meanwhile, the Demon King was in his office and had taken out Dion's letter of resignation. Having read it and remembered the expression on Dion's face which he could not understand, he grinned, thinking that Dion's actions could not be predicted. From their very first meeting, he had sensed it. The first time he saw him was when Dion stood near the hero's corpse. The demons who saw this began to ask, "Did he just kill the hero?" One demon replied that it looked like he had not only killed him but also protected them from the wave of his self-destruction. "But how does he stand on his feet after taking such a blow?" they asked. The Demon King thought that the Empire had sent a rather interesting guy. After that, he approached him and asked what his name was. He thought that Dion had shown great courage and loyalty by jumping into the middle of the battlefield for the Empire. "I can't believe they sent someone so useful to die a meaningless death," he thought. Then Dion looked up at him, wiped the blood from his face, and said his full name. The Demon King thought that if he were in their place, he wouldn't have sent such a person to die. He extended his hand to him and, with a smile, asked if he would like to join the army of the Demon King. Reminiscing about the old days, the king said that Dion had been too free after joining them, not that he could just send him on any mission. Suddenly, his gaze landed on an interesting document lying on the table. He picked it up, skimmed the text, and smiled. He immediately called his subordinate and said that he was announcing a gathering of all detachment commanders. He ordered her to gather everyone immediately. The girl obeyed and left, and he looked at the document again, smiling. "Eric should be pleased with this," he said. Meanwhile, Dion was lying under his blanket but felt a chill as if someone was talking about him. Soon, he was summoned to the Demon King. As he left his room, he felt extremely upset. One of the demons greeted Lord Aret but immediately fell silent upon seeing his expression. Dion walked quickly down the corridor, clenching his fists furiously. He thought that he had lost his chance to get the rest he wanted. The Demon King himself asked me to rest, and now suddenly he's organizing a meeting of commanders. He nervously bit his lower lip and thought, does that mean all the living squad leaders will gather there? I can't believe I have to meet all the commanders when even ordinary demons scare me to death. Does he want me dead or what? As he passed by, the demons whispered, asking if he was better yet. One of them replied that he seemed angry at the sudden summons. Hearing this, Dion thought that he needed to keep his composure. He took a deep breath and relaxed his face, thinking that it was better not to cause conflict. "If there is a fight, I will not win," he thought. A demon soldier asked, "Is he the man from the rumors? This is the first time I've seen him in person. What was his name?" The demon standing next to her sighed with a smile, placed his hand on her shoulder and called her new girl. He asked if she still couldn't remember his name. "Listen carefully," he said. "I was there the moment he killed the hero." When the Demon King asked his name, he slowly turned around and indifferently replied that he was the demon Aret. He then asked with admiration, "So, what now? You won't be able to forget his name, right?" She replied in surprise that this was the most demonic name she had ever heard. Dion threw an angry look at them and shouted in his thoughts, "I said my name was Dion Hart." Noticing Dion's gaze, the demon hid behind the new girl and told her to be careful. "He looks like he's in a bad mood," he whispered. There seemed to be rumors that Dion had accumulated stress from not being able to fight. He'd better leave before he kills someone simply for standing in his way, some whispered. They hastily disappeared from Dion's field of vision, and he, hanging his head dejectedly, thought, "Could I kill them? I couldn't even win. I'm 100% a weakling." Where did he get this feeling that the misunderstanding was only deepening over time? Well, he thought, if I look at the positives, then thanks to this, no one will bother me. If I get caught, I'll die immediately. So he couldn't let anyone know he was weak, at least not until he got out of the demonic realm. He had to act confident. At the end of the corridor, he saw the doors to the meeting hall and two guards chatting about something. As he approached them, he reminded himself to act as if he weren't afraid of anything. Noticing his movement, the guards turned their attention to him. As soon as they saw his face, they shuddered in fear. Bumyeon put on an indifferent expression. "I'm the commander of the Zero Squad. I'm the demon Erit," he reminded himself. The guards greeted him with visible fear, and he ordered them to open the door. The doors swung open, and Dion walked inside accompanied by the words, "Last but not least, the commander of the Zero Squad joins the meeting." All eyes immediately fell on him. The Demon King grinned and said, "So you've come." Seeing so many strong demons inside, Dion couldn't maintain his indifferent expression and became tense. What kind of atmosphere is this? The commander of the first detachment, Jarrett, looked at him and said he should sit next to the king. Ale glanced at the commander of the Zero Squad and thought he seemed like a weakling. This can't be right, he thought. I'd like to fight him. The commander of the Sixth Squad, Veltin, asked if Dion's excuse for being late was that he had reached his goal. The commander of the Fourth Squad, Adelia, who was sitting next to him, hit him on the shoulder. He exclaimed, "What the hell?" She replied, "I'm sure he had his reasons." Rinel clenched her fists, looking displeased at Veltin, and thought, how dare this mountain of muscles disrespect Lord Erit. Under their collective gaze, Dion nervously sat down next to the king and thought, why have so many commanders gathered here? I'm so scared and tense. I just want to go back to my room. The Demon King turned to him and asked if he was okay. Dion confirmed and apologized for being late, but the king replied that he shouldn't apologize. Obviously, he hadn't done it on purpose. Dion remained silent and thought, actually, it was on purpose. I didn't want to come here. A servant, smiling, approached the commander of the Zero Squad with a bottle in his hands and said he would pour him a drink. He placed a wine glass on the table and poured the liquid in. Dion watched closely as the glass filled. Although he kept a firm expression, his heart beamed with joy. Finally, alcohol, he thought. During meetings in the demonic kingdom, I can drink as much as I want. That's the only reason I showed up at all. He raised the glass to his mouth, but after a few sips, he looked puzzled at the contents. Is this grape juice? He asked in a firm voice. Adelia shuddered and looked at him cautiously. The Demon King smiled nervously. An oppressive silence filled the meeting hall, creating an eerie atmosphere. Dion put the wine glass on the table and, looking at the commander's glass opposite him, said that their drinks looked like alcohol. With a dissatisfied expression, he looked around the entire hall with a terrifying gaze and thought, is this discrimination against me? The Demon King covered his face with his palm and sighed tiredly, asking him to stop. It was I who ordered them to pour you the juice, he admitted. Dion looked at him from under his brows and asked why. The king asked, do you really not understand? Dion mentally replied, no, I don't. Is this discrimination against humans? Suddenly a chilling thought crossed his mind. Is he saving alcohol because he realized how useless I am? Did he finally find out the truth? Is this meeting called to announce my end? The Demon King looked at him with a smile and said, listen to me before you get angry. There's a reason I called everyone here. Dion shuddered and thought, this really is their plan. The king approached the commander of the 6th Division and told him to share the details of the documents he had provided. Veltin agreed and said that, despite the fact that the 12th Squad had been defending the settlement all this time, the number of monsters had increased sharply. The unit could no longer hold the line. After demonic monsters destroyed half of a small settlement, they evacuated the remaining settlers behind the fortress wall of a large city. However, they didn't know how long the city would hold out. They needed reinforcements to defeat the monsters. One of the commanders asked, "Where is the commander of the 12th detachment?" "He was killed," another replied. A commander asked, "Are we talking about ordinary demonic monsters?" The commander responded sternly, "Watch your words. Even ordinary monsters can become a formidable enemy if they attack together." One of the commanders exclaimed, "But these are just failed creatures, aren't they?" Dion thought they were making such a fuss, although he could understand their surprise. Demonic monsters among the demons created by the Demon King were emotionless creatures, guided only by their instincts and desires. They were so-called failed creatures. Still, he couldn't believe that the commander of the 12th squad had lost, but how did that relate to him? Belton continued, saying that they were at war every day because of the overwhelming number of demonic monsters. They didn't know why their numbers had increased so dramatically. The Demon King added that the now deceased hero had been killing them. It wasn't surprising that he died when the monsters gathered in one settlement, and that the hero died at the hands of Lord Eret. Silence fell in the hall again, and Dion, nervously biting the corner of his lip, thought, "So what's the matter? Do they intend to kill me under this pretext? But above all, I didn't kill the hero." He looked up at the Demon King with an irritated expression and thought, "What's more important, isn't it the king himself who tried to kill me? If anyone's to blame, it's him." His face darkened with horror, and in his thoughts he pleaded with the king to say something, anything. Noticing Dion's gaze, the king understood what he wanted and thought, "I knew it." Smiling with a confident look, he told Dion not to worry. Squad 0 would be sent to the site as reinforcements. These words hit Dion like a bolt of lightning. What kind of nonsense is he talking about? He thought in shock. The Demon King's smile brightened. He added that Dion should go there and relieve his stress. He believed he was doing a good job. He even thought Dion wanted to go there. Velton thought the king was speaking as if he were sending Dion on a sightseeing tour. He really believes the commander of the 0 squad can do what the commander of the 12th could not. Just how strong is he to deserve such trust? Dion's whole body trembled. He glared at the king and said his body was not in the best shape right now. In his mind, he begged, "Please don't send me. Tell me I don't have to go." Hearing this, El asked, "Doesn't he want to go?" Jur replied, "That's not the case. It may seem like he's making excuses after hearing the report, but most likely he's suppressing a fierce desire to go, calmly assessing the state of his body." Dion's face darkened even more. The misunderstanding only grew with every passing minute. Ael said, "So that's how it is? That's amazing." Jur nodded, thinking that although he still didn't fully trust him, Dion's behavior was worthy of a great commander. Ael looked at the commander of the 0 squad with admiration and smiled slightly, thinking, "Is he not only strong, but also capable of making informed decisions?" His desire to fight Dion grew even stronger. Noticing Ailey's gaze, Dion shuddered. Then, the Demon King asked him not to overexert himself. He could simply take command of his squad and relieve stress in that settlement. It wasn't difficult for him, right? Dion looked at him, clearly dissatisfied, and replied in his thoughts, "It is difficult." An admiring, friendly atmosphere reigned in the hall. Dion, looking at the smiling faces of the other commanders, thought bitterly that he would never go there. He wished he could say it out loud, but he didn't think he had a say. Clenching his fists and making an important decision, he closed his eyes nervously. Then, with a frightened face, he said, "In that case, I will go." He thought it didn't matter whether the Demon King allowed it or not. He would definitely escape from the demon realm soon. Under cover of darkness, he set out in a carriage for the settlement, along with his detachment. He sighed heavily and thought that this day had finally come. As he tried to escape, Daex only got closer. He remembered how he was packing his luggage to flee, and the king, having caught him, sighed with a smile and asked if he was already getting ready. "Do you really want to go that badly? I'm sorry for sending you so late," the king said. Dion had become very worried and had to confirm his words. Not that he could tell the Demon King he was planning to flee to the Empire. Of course, even in the Empire, he would have a hard time. After all, there was a mad emperor who had sent him to the Demon King, and a brother who hated him to death. But that still seemed better than facing certain death at the claws of monsters. He tiredly covered his face with his palm and told himself that he had better think about this in a positive way. He pulled back the curtain and, looking at his second-in-command who was riding next to him on a horse, thought that he'd heard the 0 squad like Ed knew their stuff, so maybe he could just retreat, play his part, and let them take care of the rest. The demon riding next to Ed said they would soon reach the settlement and told him to keep in line and not relax. Dion drew the curtain closed and placed his hand on the bag next to him, wondering if he needed to do anything at all. Even the king told me not to overwork myself. He untied the bag and, feeling for something inside, said, "Since the worries are over, I'll enjoy some time alone." With a smile on his face, he took out a bottle. Dion pulled a bottle of the demonic realm special alcohol from the bag. This was a rare drink, created only in the demonic realm, known for its exquisite taste. It was loved by many demons. He remembered how he had stolen the bottle during a break and muttered that, because of the king, he couldn't drink it during the meeting. But they don't know me if they think I'll give up so easily, he thought. He uncorked the bottle and said, "They say this alcohol is so luxurious it'll send you to heaven from bliss, so I should at least try it before I die, right?" Raising the neck of the bottle to his mouth, he closed his eyes and began pouring the alcohol into himself. After taking a few large sips, he sighed loudly and murmured, "This is great. Demons really do know how to drink." For the first time in a while, he finally felt alive. Thus, the trip of the commander of the Zero Detachment began under the influence of good alcohol. After a while, Ed looked at the carriage window and thought that Dion had been too quiet. He had even closed the curtains. He began to worry, wondering if Dion was still feeling unwell. Most likely, it all came down to that incident before their departure. When Dion opened the carriage door and stopped to look at the headless horses, the guy from his squad had excitedly called out and asked him to wait. He knew Dion wanted to ride a horse, but he should think about his health. He should stay in the carriage until fully recovered, especially since that was an order given by the Demon King himself. Dion looked at him and raised one eyebrow in confusion, thinking, what is he talking about? Of course I must ride in the carriage. Who even said I wanted to ride that ferocious beast? After a short pause, he replied that he understood and got back into the carriage. He thought he had just been looking at the horse out of curiosity. Ed had watched him worriedly, then closed the door and looked down sadly, thinking, since I've been serving him for a long time, maybe he did want to ride a horse. Remembering this, he thought that Dion restrains many of his desires regularly. He wanted to tell him to do as he wished, but the Demon King's order had been for Sir Eret's own sake. He remembered the Demon King's opinion about it and had exclaimed, is he crazy? The king had thought that riding a horse would positively affect Dion's health, knowing full well what condition he was in. A squad member's voice pulled Ed out of his thoughts, saying that the settlement was right ahead. As they got closer, it grew brighter, and ash began to fill the air. They had arrived near the settlement and saw everything around was on fire. Smoke filled the streets. Driving through, they passed many corpses. It's terrible, someone said. Ed looked around and remarked that he thought the demonic monsters had already destroyed everything and left. Suddenly, he sharply pulled the reins to the side and said that the monsters were probably still nearby. They had to go after them. Suddenly, one of the squad members shouted, they're ahead. They saw several goblins, wolves, and larger monsters. They exclaimed in fear, monsters. Ed asked, were they waiting for us at the entrance? And quickly ordered everyone to prepare for battle. All squad members immediately dismounted and grabbed their weapons. Ed then told them to fight for Sir Eret, who depended on them. They stood their ground for their commander, and when the monsters roared and charged, they ran to meet them. The demons, masters of combat, cut down monsters in their path. An archer fired several arrows at a goblin, hitting it dead on, while another demon rushed forward. The whole battle took place in the main square. The demons killed many monsters, but more kept coming. During the battle, Ed had to retreat quickly. Sliding along the ground, he looked at the fight and bit his lip, thinking, there's no end to this. Suddenly, one of the squad members warned him of danger. At that moment, a huge werewolf ran up and growled loudly. Ed looked up at the beast in horror and cursed, realizing he had let his guard down. Meanwhile, Jai arrived at the Demon King's office and asked if the Zero Squad could really handle things on their own. The king looked up from his documents and asked, are you talking about the destruction of the demonic monsters? Jai nodded. Since there are quite a lot of them, shouldn't we send reinforcements? The Demon King shrugged and smiled. Everything is fine, I assure you, the Zero Squad is strong. Besides, even if they face real danger, I am with them. At that moment, the commander of the Zero Squad jumped out of the carriage and attacked the werewolf, stabbing it with his daggers. A fountain of blood sprayed from the monster's chest, splattering Dion's face and clothes. Ed looked at the commander in concern and surprise. As the monster's corpse hit the ground, he called out to him. Dion remained silent and slowly approached him. Ed called out to him again more urgently, thanking him and saying he was just about to ask for help. But then he suddenly fell silent when Dion's dagger stopped a centimeter from his face. Dion smiled and asked, "Are you also my opponent?" Ed leaned back in fear, thinking, this is how Suryarit behaves after he drinks. He quickly answered, "No, I'm not your opponent." Ed looked at Dion in shock and thought, had he been drinking? But where did he even get the alcohol? Dion quickly lost interest in him and turned his head to the side, locking eyes with a huge monster nearby. He asked, "In that case, is he my opponent?" The monster immediately attacked and landed a powerful blow. Dion didn't have time to react. The force of the hit sent him flying into a wall. A loud crash echoed as dust rose around the impact. Ed looked in Dion's direction with fear and called out to him, deeply concerned. At that moment, Dion coughed up blood and slowly slid down the wall to the ground, leaving a bloody trail. Despite the pain, he smiled and looked at the monster. "Am I right?" he asked. Immediately after, he stood up and charged at the creature, swinging his daggers with terrifying speed and precision. He inflicted numerous wounds, moving with a madness that consumed him. At that moment, it was enough for him to simply distinguish enemy from ally. While he dealt with one monster, two others attacked him from behind. But Dion noticed them, readjusted his grip on the daggers, and spun around. He slashed one across the chest, then darted toward the second, stabbing him in the back and again in the chest, killing him. With a wide smile, Dion plunged his blade into yet another monster. The members of his squad watched the brutal scene with fear. They all understood in that moment exactly what kind of person the commander of the Zero Squad, Demon Hart, really was. Dion kicked another monster to the ground. Raising his dagger above it, he smiled. "Now it's your turn." His mind was consumed by a single thought: leave nothing alive. Even if his opponent seemed dead, he had to continue striking. He plunged the dagger into the monster's corpse, once, twice, a third time. His intention was clear: to strike fear into the hearts of any enemy watching. The monsters, witnessing the horror, grew scared and began to retreat. Dion laughed and kept stabbing, blood splattering onto him. That's how he had survived this cruel world. With such a weak body, he needed madness to endure. As time passed, news of what had happened in the settlement reached the imperial palace. A man in a robe knelt before Emperor Eduardo Desert and reported the events involving the commander of the Zero Squad. The emperor was intrigued. The man explained that a scout sent to the demonic kingdom claimed the massacre was the work of the Zero Squad's commander. According to rumors, he had displayed incredible strength and cruelty. Eduardo said, "I've heard of him. They say he's the most valuable talent the Demon King possesses." He paused, thoughtful. The most valuable, these words made him think of someone he missed. "If they want to escape from the demonic realm, then we must prepare too," he said, "and I already have the perfect candidate." He looked at the man before him. "How do you feel about it?" The man looked up at the emperor, and Eduardo said, "I will grant you a special opportunity to earn achievement." The man immediately bowed his head. "I will accept any order, Your Majesty." Eduardo smiled. "Then why shouldn't you become that talent?" Time passed. Dion remembered the 8-year war for the glory of the Empire. That battlefield was drenched in blood. The vanguard had fallen, a noble sacrifice on the front lines. He pulled his dagger from a corpse and shook the blood off. They were only the meat shield of the Empire, he thought. It was just hell. The soldiers had fought bravely for the Empire, pushing forward into chaos, but Dion hadn't wanted to go to that hell. He hadn't wanted to risk his life fighting. After killing another enemy, he thought bitterly, fight for the Empire? How ridiculous. He didn't want any of it. After slicing the legs of one enemy, he spun and attacked another that had come up behind him. He had no intention of dying for the Empire that had sent him to this hell. He did everything just to survive. He refused to die according to their wishes. When no more enemies remained around him, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw a man with the same face as his, but with a crazed expression. The man grabbed Dion's hand and pulled him close, looking into his eyes. "You have to survive," the man said, "at any cost, and take revenge on them." Immediately after, Dion awoke from the nightmare, screaming. He gasped for breath. Was that a dream? He wondered. It seemed important. He stood up and looked around. "Is this my room?" Ben, who was sitting next to him, asked, "You finally woke up?" Dion turned to him, then looked over and saw Ed too. he said their names questioningly. His deputy cried out in concern, "You've been asleep the whole day." Ben added, "We managed to heal you while you slept, but if only you knew how shocked we were when we saw you come back covered in blood." Dion furrowed his brow. "What are you talking about? How did I get back here? What about the mission?" Ed replied, "The destruction of the demonic monsters was a success. They fled in fear and we returned to the castle after you collapsed." He closed his eyes and lowered his head. "I'm sorry. If only I had been a little stronger." Dion looked at him in surprise. "The mission is completed? I fainted?" Ben nodded. "Looks like you have temporary memory loss." Apparently, the injury was serious. The commander looked at him in confusion. He asked, "Does he not remember? He was hit by a demonic monster, but he also jumped up, so they didn't think anything was wrong." Dion thought, what kind of nonsense is he talking about? Then he repeated in surprise, "Memory loss," but suddenly he stopped mid-sentence and covered his face with his palm. Memories of the past battle flashed through his mind all at once. Not believing what he remembered, he thought, "What does all this mean?" His face darkened. Was I drunk? Rowdy? He began to wonder if he had passed out from drinking too much, not from an actual injury. Then, smiling with admiration, said, "I heard that Squad Zero completed the mission without a single casualty, and there were a lot of monsters there. That's just incredible." Dion smiled wryly and replied, "I didn't do anything." Ben responded, "You're still so modest." He gave up and sighed, thinking that Deon really hadn't done anything. Did Ed and Squad Zero handle everything? He apologized to his deputy, saying, "I interfered and caused nothing but trouble." Ed looked at him, slightly surprised, then replied, "That's not true at all. You were incredible. You personally defeated countless monsters on the front lines. You're the very embodiment of a commander." Ben added, "You still underestimate yourself. We're aware of your strength, but your body is weakened now due to the effects of the battle with the hero." He nodded in agreement. Ben, wiping his tears with a handkerchief, asked Dion to be careful. Dion awkwardly covered his face and thought, "What are they talking about? How could I defeat the monsters?" Ed, a little upset, said, "I understand that you might not fully trust us," then clenched his fist with determination and with tears in his eyes added, "But thanks to you, we survived. We'll become stronger so that you can trust us and rest peacefully." Dion's stress level began to rise at an alarming rate. He thought, "I'm going to go crazy. They're putting too much pressure on me. I don't understand what they're talking about. I don't have those abilities. I don't know anything anymore. I just want to leave." At that moment, the commanders of the 3rd and 4th detachments entered his room and called out to him. Adelia raised her hand to her chest with concern and said, "We heard you just woke up." Hare looked at her with displeasure and loudly said, "Be quiet. The commander of the Zero Squad is recovering." She exclaimed, "You're louder than me. Why did you even follow me? Do you want me to play with you?" He retorted, "Don't be a fool. I came to show respect to the commander of the Zero Squad." Dion looked at them in shock, thinking, "Why did they come? Are we really so close that they'd visit me?" Then, the commander of the 1st detachment entered the room and immediately said, "You're both the same." Seeing him, Dion felt completely unwell. Jor crossed his arms and said, "If you came to visit him, then greet him quietly and leave. Can't you see he's uncomfortable?" Ael nervously hid his hands behind his back and Adelia looked away. Seeing only darkness on the face of the commander of the Zero detachment, Ael stammered and apologized. Having lost his composure, Dion threw up his hands and cursed loudly, shouting, "Get out of here." He wanted to, but alas, he couldn't. He looked at them with a dissatisfied glare, thinking, "How can I get rid of them?" Ailey mentally cursed, thinking Dion was probably sensitive to noise after returning from a mission. "I was acting too carefree." Joker said, "I understand how you feel, but please refrain from fighting within the walls of the Demon King's castle. We can't kill each other here." Dion raised one eyebrow in confusion and repeated his last words, "Kill each other?" He thought, "Who could I possibly kill? This is ridiculous. It'd be a miracle if I even landed one blow. If they found out how weak he really was, they'd show him no mercy." Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. He turned his gaze sharply toward the commanders, which only made them more nervous. He wondered, should I teach them mercy for the sake of my future? He smiled and thought, maybe they'll spare me even after they find out how weak I am. Seeing the terrifying smile on his face, Ael said, "If you're angry, then I ask for forgiveness." His expression became even more terrifying. That's right, I am angry. He thought he needed to choose his words carefully, but his voice was shaking. He knew he shouldn't show emotion. After his words, the commanders grew even more nervous and fell silent. Dion said, "There's no need to be violent just because I'm angry. It doesn't hurt to show mercy sometimes." He raised his index finger and asked, "Do you understand mercy? Even when someone lies, even when someone is weaker than you, they still deserve mercy. Please." He mentally begged them, "Show mercy to me." He looked at them with a wide smile and wide eyes. In his thoughts, he told them to remember this lesson well and to be sure to spare him in the future. But the result of his words was completely different. Silence filled the room. Trembling with fear, they replied that they would keep this in mind. Dion thought, "What kind of atmosphere is this? Didn't I put it super nicely? Did it really sound like a sermon, even though I'm only human?" Jucker thought that Dion was terrifying, even when he was forgiving. He coughed into his fist and decided to change the subject, saying that he had heard Dion had completed the mission successfully. He must have worked hard. Adelia, whose fear had already disappeared after the recent words of the Zero Commander, said with admiration and joy in her voice that there was so much talk about him in the castle. "They say he killed half of all the monsters with his own hands." Dion started drooling at this news, and they asked if he was okay. He covered his mouth with his hand in shock and confirmed their words, while thinking, "I killed half of all the monsters. What kind of ridiculous rumor is that?" At this rate, he thought, he would begin to take credit for the achievements of others. He looked up at Ed with a guilty expression and apologized to him in his thoughts, but when he saw Ed's face glowing with joy, he was stunned. What kind of expression is that? Ale walked up to Dion's bed, leaned in slightly, and smiling, said that he had also heard stories of Dion's heroism and had come to ask for a favor. Dion leaned back slightly and nervously asked, "Favor?" He thought the conversation was heading in a sinister direction. Asael said that, in fact, it was just a small thing. Once Dion was fully recovered, could he ask him to spar? Dion remained silent, horrified by the idea. This isn't just a battle with an ordinary demon, sparring between him, the commander of the 3rd Division who led the elite troops protecting the Demon King, and himself. He asked, dumbfounded, "Sparring? With me?" Asael vigorously confirmed and said that he constantly heard about Dion's brilliance, so he'd like to be taught a thing or two. Jaka was intrigued and said it sounded fun. He noted that the commander of the Zero Squad hadn't sparred with anyone since taking office, and he too wanted to see the level of his skills. He wondered if Dion would accept the offer. Adelia was excited by the idea of sparring and with a wide smile said, "You know that the 4th Squad handles information, right? We'll attract as many spectators as possible." Ale replied with displeasure that even if a crowd came, the important thing was that they didn't interfere. Dion asked them to wait and said he didn't want any sparring, but seeing their joyful faces, he couldn't bring himself to outright refuse. He became increasingly nervous, thinking, why do they decide everything themselves? Does this even make sense? I'll be torn into a million pieces with just one blow. He grabbed his head and said he thought it would be quite difficult for him to accept the sparring, as he still hadn't fully recovered from the battle with the monsters. He immediately stopped short and added, "You could die from something like that." Then he completely started mumbling nonsense, thinking, what am I even saying? Asil was surprised by his words and looking at him intently, thought, is he avoiding battle? But why? Dion noticed his gaze and thought that his eyes were full of suspicion. I won't get away with flimsy excuses like this. Suddenly, Jerker said, "This is amazing." Ailey and Dion immediately turned to him. Jer, thoughtfully raising a hand to his chin, told Ailey, "You're so confident in yourself, even against the commander. I've always wondered why the commander of the Zero Squad doesn't take part in sparring, but now it all makes sense." He wasn't avoiding battle out of pride, he was concerned about his opponent's health. The commanders of the 3rd and Zero Squads remained silent, dumbfounded. Then they looked at each other and Dion, pointing a finger at himself, raised one eyebrow questioningly. Realization struck Asil. He then exclaimed in surprise, "Is this true?" Dion shouted in his thoughts, "What is this?" Jur said that the refusal was actually better. Besides, not much time had passed since Dion's last battle, so it would be more difficult for him to control himself. Ale continued for him, saying that once the sparring began, it would only end with someone's death. Realizing this, he clenched his hands into fists and nervously thought that he had always had the courage to offer a fight on equal terms with commanders, but he had never been sure he would emerge victorious. He looked carefully at the imperturbable face of the commander of the Zero Squad and thought, what kind of crazy steadfastness is this? He is an incredible talent, recognized even by the Demon King. Ale bowed his head and said that as much as it upset him, he couldn't guarantee a victory or claim he was ready to die. He didn't have the heart to fight him to the death. He put his hands behind his back and bowed, saying that although it hurt his pride, he was grateful that Dion had listened to him. Deon, very surprised by this reaction, thought, did he just accept the refusal? Ale thought with a smile that, as expected, Sir Erit was incredible. He had forced these once hostile commanders to treat him with respect. Dion didn't understand at all what had just happened and thought about how he'd avoided sparring. Suddenly, Ale looked up at him with a confident expression and said with a grin, but I haven't given up yet. Once I gain enough strength. With confidence that he would not die, Ale declared that he would ask Dion to spar again once he regained his strength. His frightening gaze lingered on Dion for several seconds. Clenching his hands into fists, Dion shouted in his thoughts for him to just give up already. Ale, after his own words, was inflamed with energy and said that this was great. He felt unprecedented enthusiasm after giving this promise to Sir Effort. Dion extended his hand to him and nervously asked if he could listen to him, but Ali had already left the room, saying goodbye as he was off to training. Dion exclaimed, when did he get so far? After that, the door slammed and Ja said that Ali had left, with Dion still reaching out toward the door. The commander of the first squad looked at him and said that he had lacked motivation for a long time, but now he was finally able to ignite a spark in him. This was good. Adelia said that it was very noisy. Dion sadly lowered his head and said that he was going crazy. He grabbed his head and began to fall onto the bed. His deputy immediately ran up to him and held him, calling out excitedly, thinking that his temperature was rising again. He looked up at the commanders and apologized, saying that Sir Erit needed rest. Jahagar agreed and apologized as well, hoping Dion would recover soon. Adelia wished him a good rest, and Ben gave Dion water. With trembling hands, Dion took the glass and began to drink. One thought kept spinning in his head, how he could escape from the demonic kingdom. Before leaving, Jar turned to him and asked when Dion had recovered enough to spar with the commander of the third squad, to which he would look forward. After that, he left the room. Dion silently watched him leave, then fell exhausted onto the bed. Ben called out to him worriedly. He covered him with a blanket and exclaimed that his heart was beating like crazy. Aid asked his commander to calm down. Dion remained silent and thought that he should run away from here. Time passed. He went out into the street, leaning his elbows on a column, and sighed heavily. This is tiring, but somehow, I managed to get out of there. After that incident, someone was constantly coming to him. Ed came in and asked if he should meet with his squad. Everyone was waiting for him. Ben said that if he just sat in his room, he wouldn't get any better. If he wanted to recover quickly, then he should add some simple exercises to his routine. Even Ale, completely soaked in sweat after training, visited him again and asked if Dion wanted to see the Zero Squad. Ale would train hard to fulfill this promise, so Dion should just wait for him. All their never-ending visits had raised his stress levels to an incredibly high point. What do they all need from me? He kicked a nearby rock and shouted in rage that he just wanted them to leave him alone. The stone hit the head of a demon nearby, who screamed loudly with his comrades. He turned around, rubbing the bump that had arisen after the blow, and exclaimed, "Who did this? What kind of freak threw this?" As soon as he saw who threw the stone, he immediately fell silent and became very nervous. Dion came out of the shadows, looking at him with a deadpan expression. This is bad. Was it really impossible to get into someone else's head? He wanted to ask for forgiveness, but the demon interrupted him, stammering and asking, "Sir Erit?" He bowed to him several times and said that they welcomed him, the commander of the Zero Squad, and apologized for causing him concern. Dion asked, "What concern?" He noticed behind the demons a small incubus. The demons explained that they had taught him wisdom since he had blocked their path as a lower incubus. However, they had already sorted everything out and would no longer interfere with him. Ian trembled with fear when he saw the commander of the Zero Squad, and meanwhile he thought that he had heard that Indes were the lowest demons in the hierarchy of the demonic world. So they had created a group for bullying. The demons walked past Dion, and one of them, with a nervous smile on his face, said that they would go, thinking that Dion didn't seem to be in a good mood, so they needed to leave quickly. Dion turned his gaze to the incubus and thought that it was good that they left on their own. Although he didn't know why, he wondered what he should do with this child. Since this was the first time he had seen a demon weaker than himself, it caused concern. Meanwhile, the incubus became nervous and thought that Dion was looking at him. He had heard that Dion usually behaved quietly, but if he suddenly got angry, he showed cruelty unprecedented even for demons. Dion was sure that his presence was irritating Dion. He closed his eyes and cried, thinking that this time he might actually die. But contrary to his expectations, Dion extended his hand to him and asked, "Can you stand up?" His gaze softened, and a smile appeared on his face. He said, "Those idiots have already left, so don't worry." Hien looked up at him in surprise, thinking that Dion's eyes were not looking at him with disgust, but with good intentions. "How long has it been since I was treated with such kindness?" He looked uncertainly at Dion's hand and said, "I'm an incubus. Don't you feel..." Disgusted by physical contact with him, Dion grabbed Hien's hand and pulled him toward himself, forcing him to stand up. Afterward, he asked, "What's wrong? For that matter, I am human. Do you feel disgusted by me?" Hien became worried and replied, "Of course not. How could I?" Dion smiled and patted him on the shoulder, saying that he felt the same way, so there was no need to worry, he thought. He's also trying to survive the demonic realm with all his might, right? Hien smiled and asked, "How can you be so kind to me? I'm in complete admiration. I've never been treated with such warmth." He then smiled with a sly look and said that he would like to repay Dion. He asked if Dion had any extra time. Dion raised one eyebrow and repeated, in surprise, "Too much time? I feel like I'm in a terrible mess, but maybe I just think so." At that moment, the Demon King decided to visit him. Having entered his room, the first thing he wanted to do was ask Dion about his well-being, but upon not finding him there, he stopped and wondered where he had gone. Meanwhile, Dion was thinking about how to respond to the incubus. He thought that it wasn't like he had anything to do. He approached him and said, "I really want to repay you for your help by giving you a gift from the garden herbs that relieve fatigue. Since you're very busy being a squad leader, I'll understand if you don't have time." Dion became interested and asked, "Is there even a garden in the Demon King's castle? I wonder if there really is a garden in this depressing and disgusting place." The incubus bowed to him and confirmed his words, apologizing for the late greeting. He introduced himself, saying that he was the gardener who took care of all the plants in the Demon King's castle. Dion was slightly surprised and thought, even in the demonic kingdom, there is such a peaceful profession. He rubbed his chin and began to smile, thinking about the garden. This is a place with beautiful flowers and greenery. Fresh air? Isn't this exactly what I need right now? He said it sounded like the perfect place to calm his nerves and asked if Hien could show him the garden. Hien was delighted and said that Dion could trust him. He pointed toward the garden and asked the commander of the Zero Squad to follow him. He thought that finally he could breathe a sigh of relief. Soon they entered the garden. Hien, pointing to many flowers with his hand, said with a smile, "These are all here." Dion was delighted and thought, "This is it," he said with a big smile on his face. "It's so beautiful here." He smiled and sheepishly scratched the back of his head, while Dion began to enjoy nature, the refreshing aroma of greenery and fresh air. "This is exactly what I need." He decided to walk, and at the same moment a predatory plant opened its mouth wide. When Dion approached, its saliva dripped onto his head. He was very frightened and jumped back as the plant's jaws closed, but it didn't have time to bite him. Ian walked away, grabbing his heart, thinking, "What was that?" The incubus quickly approached the plant and said that it was impossible for it to attack Sir Eret like that. His tone became threatening as he asked, "Or should I teach it a lesson again?" After this, the plant immediately calmed down. He turned to Sir Eret with an apologetic smile and said that he thought the plant was just happy that Dion had come. Dion remained silent and nervously bit his lip, thinking, "I take back my words about a weak demon. He's also crazy." He looked around the garden, deeply immersed in the thought that this garden seemed normal only at first glance. Are there only such plants in the garden itself? He needed to get out of here. Ian called out to him worriedly, and Dion apologized, saying that there was an urgent matter and he had to go. Keen got upset and asked, "Is it really necessary? There are cooler plants inside the garden." Dion got nervous and exclaimed, "This isn't what I want. I need to go to the training ground." The incubus reached out to take his hand and asked, "The training ground?" Dion excitedly pulled his hand away and said that he needed to see his squad at the training ground right now. Since he had been away from them for a long time, he felt that he must meet them immediately. He hurriedly left the garden and said goodbye to him. Keen extended his hand in his direction, trying to say something, but then got upset and let go of his hand, saying that Dion had left. Judging by such a rush, it seemed that Dion was indeed very busy. The carnivorous plant pushed him, and Heen, touching it, asked, "What's this? Are you also sad that he left? Do you think he'll come back?" The plant licked its lips. Heen smiled and said that he needed to see Dion one more time and prepare a gift. He seemed to really like plants, so Heen thought he should give him the cutest plant from the garden. He hoped that he and Sir Eret would become even closer. Dion, meanwhile, said that he still got goosebumps. It was stupid to think there would be someone normal inside the Demon King's castle. He entered the corridor and headed to his room, thinking that the room would be the best place as there were dangers everywhere outside. But suddenly, he stopped and said that although he was using this as an excuse, he really needed to see the Zero Squad. Out of shame from the chaos caused by drunkenness, Dion postponed the meeting. However, the Demon King and Ed continued to insist on it. He remembered the words of his deputy and clutched his heart, thinking that his words couldn't be called wrong. Since he was outside, he needed to at least show himself to them. They would still try for him. Because of today's traumatic experience, he was no longer afraid to meet them. Soon, he arrived at the training ground. Looking around, he said, "I thought so. There's no one here." He walked to the center and thought that he had completed his task of showing up so he could leave. But not everything could be solved by avoiding people. He wondered how strong the Zero Squad was. He walked around, wondering if there was a place where he could sit and wait. He noticed a rack of training swords and wondered if they trained with wooden swords. He took a sword and swung it, thinking that during the destruction of the monsters he had been out of his mind and didn't remember anything. "This is a great opportunity to test myself," he thought. But as soon as he raised the sword, his hand immediately dropped under its weight. He tried to lift it again, but he couldn't. He thought, "This sword is so heavy." His face turned red with shame as he awkwardly smiled and said, "I can hardly lift a wooden sword, let alone an iron one." He put the sword tip to the floor and placed his hands on the hilt. Afterward, he sighed tiredly, cursing his weakness. "I just need to get used to using a dagger," he thought. At that moment, demons entered the training ground, and Dion, hearing their surprised sighs, looked toward the entrance. At the door, he saw the Zero Squad looking at him in shock, their mouths opening in surprise on their own. He thought, members of the squad, when did they get here? He hoped they hadn't seen him in such a strange position with the sword, which caused even more misunderstanding. With his appearance in such a cool pose, he aroused their admiration. They came closer to him, greeted him excitedly, and asked if he was feeling well. They hadn't seen him for so long that they were starting to worry. They were on a break now, so they weren't slacking off at all. Dion threw his sword down and shuddered nervously. The members of his squad came closer, smiling and admiring him, saying that during the last mission he had been inimitable. Dion thought, "What's wrong with them?" He spread his arms to the sides and, in order to calm the endless admiration, asked them to calm down. He said that he was fine and that they could relax. The members of his squad calmed down, and one of them whispered that Dion still looked tired. Another replied that he always said that. Dion looked at them with displeasure and thought, "What are they whispering about?" One of the squad members said that Dion was definitely not okay because he had overdone it last time. They would protect their commander no matter what. They wiped away their tears, and Dion thought, "Why are they looking at me like that?" He decided not to dwell on it and sighed heavily, thinking that he would finish what he had to do and leave. He turned away from them and said that he wanted to come right after the mission, but due to various circumstances he couldn't. He apologized and said they had done well last time. Since he usually chose the tactic of neglect, he would give them the necessary amount of encouragement. Once they started training, he would sit and watch. He picked up the sword and decided to leave the platform, saying that he had come to tell them this. He was sure they would have managed just fine without his intervention. In the ranks of the Zero Squad, there was a stranger sent by the Emperor, but no one noticed him. He quietly took out his sword and walked toward Dion. He said they could continue training, but suddenly he fell silent when his leg gave way, and he began to fall. He became very worried and mentally cursed, thinking, "My leg gave way. If I fall, it will be terribly humiliating. I need to do something about it quickly." A second later, he put the sword on the floor and leaned on it, sitting on one knee and taking a stable position. At that moment, the stranger swung his sword with the intention of killing him, but missed. Dion was very lucky that his leg gave way at that precise moment. The man who attacked him was very surprised and exclaimed, "How did he dodge?" Dion slowly turned around, glaring at him. His face then took on a very surprised and dumbfounded look. Members of his squad immediately came to their senses and called out to the commander asking if he was okay. What kind of freak did this? Dion thought, what was this? Now, did he just attack me? He became very nervous and turned around, thinking that it was dangerous and that he needed to run away. But as he turned, he accidentally hit his attacker with his elbow in the face, knocking him down. Dion himself was surprised by what he had just done. Blood sprayed from the man's mouth and nose. He covered his mouth with his hand and began to cough loudly. Dion froze in place, looking at him in confusion. He thought, did I really hit him? The man finally cleared his throat and called Dion a freak. He removed his hand from his face and, displeased, called Dion the demon errant.